In this video, entitled To the Future and Beyond, we're going to be looking at IP version 6. In everything that we have done so far, we've been dealing mostly with IP version 4. We've been dealing with how do I set up a valid range of IP addresses? Once we've done that, normally there's a server on our network called a DHCP server, standing for Dynamic Host Configuration Protocol, that issues out not only the valid IP addresses, but the subnet mask and the IP address of the router or default gateway. In addition to that, it can also give out the DNS server so we can do name resolution and some other options. With IP version 6, because it can generate its own IP address, each machine can do that, we don't necessarily have to have DHCP assign them. We can, but we could also just have DHCP assign other items like the DNS server. So we're going to be looking a little bit at IP version 6. We'll be looking at setting up DHCP in a stateless manner, meaning I'm only telling you who's going to do your name resolution, or a stateful manner. I'm going to give you your IP address and everything else you need. So now we're going to the future of IP and beyond. In this video, to the future and beyond, we're going to do a comparison between IP version 4 and IP version 6 because the future of IP is IP version 6. IP version 4 was created many, many years ago, and as you can see, I have a listing of what it is made of. It is a 32-bit address in binary or base 2. And I have mentioned a couple of times approximately how many IP addresses that created altogether. And if I do 2 to the 32nd power, that gives me about 4 billion of them. But remember, we didn't use all of them for host addresses. We only use Class A, Class B, and Class C for host addresses. Class D was used for multicasting, and there was a whole section called Class E that were only ever used in a lab. So while it was originally thought we will never run out of these, that is not the case. And I'm going to go over private addresses, which were created as sort of a stopgap measure until IP version 6 was created. And what is IP version 6? It is still binary because that's what computers understand, but it's 128 bits long. And when we see an IP version 6 address written, it is typically written in hex, which is why we went over how to translate from binary to hex in Who's Afraid of a Little Hex. So, x to the y, 128, that's how many possible IP addresses there are in IP version 6. That's like one for every square foot covering the entire planet, even everything that is underwater. And until we build space stations out on different planets, this is probably going to be enough because the only thing that this doesn't cover is a portion that's a planet code. With IP version 4, 2 sequential addresses that are public addresses like 192.169.100.100 and 192.169.100.101, they may not be anywhere near each other. But with IP version 6, they are set up to make routing easier. Now, I have a little question here about what do we normally get from a DHCP server. In most locations, we have one of two ways that we are typically going to use to assign IP addresses. We're going to type them manually, which doesn't work real well if I have a lot of machines, but if I have a very small network, that could possibly work. Otherwise, there is a service running on either a machine or For most of our home networks or small offices, it's probably running on our wireless access point. And that is the service known as DHCP or Dynamic Host Configuration Protocol. Now, that is the protocol that normally assigns IP addresses to every machine on our network. That is the service that if we're creating a range of addresses, which we have been doing when we've been subnetting, that's where we set that up so that that machine or that service can issue out the IP addresses. But is that the only thing that an IP version 4 DHCP server can issue? No, it can issue a whole lot more. In fact, here is a list of the common options that can be set up in DHCP to give to the clients. Yes, I get the IP address. Yes, I get a subnet mask. I get a default gateway or a router. And then I get, how do I do name resolution? Because we don't normally, when we're browsing either the internet or the local network, we don't normally put in the IP address we want. We put in the name of the machine, file server, print server, Amazon.com, Microsoft.com, whatever. We put in a name, and that name then gets resolved to an IP address because that's what the computer really needs to be able to deliver the message. It has to determine, looking at the IP address of the local machine versus the IP address of what we're trying to contact. Is it on the same network? Do I have to set it to the router or default gateway, or can a switch deliver it? And the last option that is typically assigned in an IP version 4 address is going to be, how long is this lease good for? Because you're just leasing it. You don't get to keep it forever and ever unless it's statically assigned. And by statically assigned, I mean manually typed in. But if you have hundreds of machines on your network, that is not a viable option. You have seen in these videos how often I've started typing, stopped typing, backed up because I made a typo. And I can promise you, if I had to manually assign IP addresses to hundreds of machines, there would be so many typos, it wouldn't even be funny. But these are the options for IP version 4. So, what does IP version 6 give us? In my initial question here, I talked about one other question, and that is a private address for IP version 4 versus private addresses for IP version 6. And I have a IP configuration that I have pulled up for my own machine. I opened up a command prompt and I typed in the expression ipconfig, because this is a Windows system, then a space and then /all. And as you can see, my IP configuration is on my wireless adapter. And I have in hex the physical address, which is the MAC address. I also have some sort of weirdness looking there called a link local IP version 6 address. I will come back to what that means. And then I have an internal preferred private IP address for IP version 4. 192.168, which is the private network. My wireless access point uses the network ID 99, and then this particular host is number 137 on that network. And it gives me a subnet mask. It also gives me a lease time, and it gives me the default gateway, which also happens to be the DHCP server. It's the same device that is both my router out to the outside world and my DHCP server. And I have a very long address there that looks like a DHCP version 6 client. And it is written in hex because otherwise 128 bits in binary is very, very long. And as I showed you in the video, Who's Afraid of a Little Hex, every 4 binary bits equates to 1 hex character. So the letter C that is at the very end of this DHCP version 6 address, that letter C is actually the number 12, and that is made up of 4 binary bits. So with my wireless access point for IP version 4, it's issuing out to me the router, DNS information, because you can see the DNS server, that's for name resolution, how long is my lease time, etc. But do I have to do the same thing for IP version 6? And the answer is no. With IP version 6, there are 2 different ways that we can have the DHCP server work. Now, I will come back to that IP configuration again in just a moment, but I need to go over with all of you the 2 different ways that DHCP can function for version 6. The 2 different ways are known as stateful and stateless. And if you notice with stateless, it doesn't actually provide the IP addresses at all. It allows each machine, using a really weird looking feature there called SLAAC, it allows each machine to create 2 different types of IP addresses. One that is global, unique in the whole planet. That's what that means, a global unicast address. And another one that is like a PIPA. In IP version 4, we had a series of addresses that were known as a PIPA, or automatic private IP addressing, that if we couldn't contact the DHCP server, each Windows machine would automatically create an address that only works inside, that started with 169.254. There is a similar functionality in IP version 6, and that is what the link local address is. This is an IP address, an IP version 6 address that you can see is written in a combination of numbers and letters because it is written in hex, that only works inside of my network. Now, you may look at that and go, that doesn't look near as long as that. Well, no, it doesn't. Because these 2 dots right here means there's a combination of zeros. There's a whole series of 4 places that are all zeros that are just being left off, and that's what the 2 colons mean. But this type of address, the link local IP version 6 address, is like a PIPA. So if I have stateless, it will create both. It will create a unique global address that can be routed right straight to my front door, which may be why we may want to go with stateful. One of the benefits of having a private internal address is you can't find that machine out on the internet. Now, I have been showing you my private IP version 4 address, but you can't access that. That IP address will not work out on the internet. But because IP version 6 can create globally unique addresses, if I'm using stateless DHCP, then those IP addresses can be accessed from the internet, and I may want to hide them. And with stateless, it will give me my DNS server, and if I happen to be in a domain, which my machine is not, it will also give me the domain name. But with stateful, I am using the DHCP server to provide IP version 6 addresses and the DNS server and the domain name. The only thing that it doesn't provide for me is the default gateway or the router. Why? Because in IP version 6, the routers advertise. They basically send a message out to all the machines. It's called an anycast, and they say, hey, I'm the router, I'm the way to get out. So With IP version 6, unless we have built a space station on Mars, we're pretty much covered for IP addresses for the near future. We can either let each machine generate its own, because manually adding IP addresses is not something one wants to do all day. We can have the DHCP server issue both the IP address and some additional information, or just the additional information. And that is the difference between stateful and stateless. The other big difference is the router. With IP version 6, the routers send out advertisement messages, and then they provide the default gateway address. So this is the future of IP. If you like this video, please click like or subscribe. If you want any additional information on IP version 6, please feel free to contact me in the email address that will be listed in this outro. I hope you've enjoyed these series of videos, and if you need any additional help, please contact me. I promise you, I will answer. The end of each one of these YouTube videos, I want to do what I do for every student I've ever taught at the end of every class. That is, give them a way to reach out if they want additional information. The email address that is associated with this series of YouTube videos is mgteach2024@gmail.com. One more time, that's mgteach2024@gmail.com. If you have any questions, want additional practice, whatever, please feel free to contact me. I promise you, I will answer you.